So here we have a vehicle that the rocker panel is run over some type of object, collapsing the rocker panel outwards in. The panel definitely needs to be replaced due to the extent of the damage. The first thing we're going to do is go into the computer, find out exactly where the manufacturer recommends sectioning and replacements for those procedures. Hold up the vehicle manufacturer's website. That'll give us all the information on how to properly replace a panel. As you can see in the screen, it's showing us where their sectioning procedures are recommended, how to replace the component, what materials to use. It's giving you very specific dimensions on how to replace the panel and what points to replace it at. You can see here from point A to point B, measuring down to the millimeters. It's crucial to follow all the vehicle manufacturers' recommended procedures and or required procedures, as these have all been crash tested and the only true way to restore the vehicle to pre-loss condition, making sure that it'll react the same way if it ever is in an accident again. There's a couple different types of welding that'll be done on this panel replacement, and here in this graphic you can see it shows you clearly what needs to be done, whether if it's resistant spot welded or MIG welded, and we'll show you that on the vehicle how that's being done.
Now that we've identified the manufacturer's recommended replacement procedure, we've prepared the car by removing the panels for access. We've disconnected the electrical system. We've protected the interior, covered all glass because of grinding sparks, welding sparks, etc. We've located the cut areas on the panel, and to remove it, we will start by grinding the welds. You can see the existing welds are spot welds from a resistant welder, and by grinding on them we remove the metal around the weld, and that way the panel will just fall off eventually once we remove all of the welds. We've removed the panel now, and prior to installing the new panel we've rust-proofed all of the interior pieces, and our next step is to replicate the body adhesives and soundproofing foams that the factory has installed. We're now ready to put the new panel in place and clamp it. We now have the new panel clamped in place. Our next step is to weld it on. So again, we go back to the manufacturer's specs that tell us what and type of welders to use and where they would like them used. So our choices are, we have a resistant spot welder which will replicate the spot welds. We have a MIG welder that not only does steel, but also aluminum and silicon bronze, according to what the specs are. So, we'll start welding now. Our first welds will replicate with the resistant spot welder. This is an example of how the resistant spot welder replicates the factory welds. As you can see, the comparison. Let me do a little MIG weld. Now we're on to using the MIG welder. After finishing the welding process, we sanded the weld smooth with a sander, coated it with a polyester filler to remove any grinder marks, imperfections. Next stop will be the paint shop.
Okay, whether or not if you're in here for a large dent, major panel repair, or something just as small as a minor scratch, there's a lot of steps to go into refinishing a vehicle to restore the corrosion protection, and Tyson's going to walk you through some of those steps to explain the processes and why it does take a few days to get a car repainted.
So when you buy a replacement panel, it comes standard with factory E-coat on it, which is a corrosion protection coating that will allow the product not to rust. Here we have taken the E-coat off, sanded it down to bare metal, and applied or welded these pegs to it to pull the dent out. Right here we have a polyester body filler as a coating to cover in any sand scratches or grinder marks left behind. This right here is an etch primer, which bonds to the bare metal and allows any other product to stick to it. It also is another corrosion protective surfacer. Here's a high build primer surfacer we use to fill in any sand scratches left behind from the polyester body filler. We have a black guide coat applied to it so we can see when we start sanding on it, we can see any scratches in the primer, as you can see here where the scratches are left behind. Right here is a fully sanded primer surfacer with no sand scratches or guide coat showing in it. Then we can apply a sealer which seals in everything and allows us to put our base coat product in it. Also acts as sort of a ground coat for color. Here we have our base coat, which is the color that is actually on your car underneath the clear coat. Here is the clear coat, which acts as a UV protection and gives a full gloss and shine to your product.
One of the most common questions people ask me after an accident is my vehicle ever going to be the same again? What we're going to do here is walk through a little bit of how we go through and measure a vehicle. A vehicle in an accident obviously has a lot of energy as it's traveling and gets impacted. Both a unitized vehicle or a conventional, a full-frame vehicle are designed to take that energy, absorb that energy, transfer it above or below the driver and passenger compartment. Brian's going to show us how we go through to measure a vehicle to return it back to its factory.
You're going to do with a car that's been in an accident. Obviously, we already have it on the frame bench. But what we need to do is we have to clamp the car to the bench. So we have these mechanical clamps that clamp the car to the frame rack. Then we're set to go ahead and measure the car. So we have the car clamped down to the frame rack. And now we have to measure the damage and see what is wrong with the vehicle. With the vehicles nowadays, there's a lot of damage that can happen that you won't even see. So we have one of the latest technologies, it's sonar measuring. It's called the Shark for that reason, it's sonar. But what it does is it has probes that send sound waves to a beam, and every attachment that I set up on the vehicle, it'll read it in millimeters, and it's very accurate. So how we go about that is there's mechanical attachments. We go into the computer and it'll tell us which attachment goes where. And what we'll do is we'll set it all up. Like I have one here that's ready for this vehicle, but it sets up in
A point that's already assigned, and we'll get it in here.
and that's one point right there that we can measure. We go down and we'll put as many as 12, maybe more, and you can actually measure the whole car, so you know it's not just one point you're seeing at all. We can go back to the computer, and this shows our frame, and that is looking at it underneath. And these show every point that I have. So with our measuring system, I go into the computer and I use the VIN number off the car, and it'll be specific to that vehicle. So this is the car we're working on. This just happens to be a Subaru. But we can go in to that specific area that we want to see that we're working on, or we can go back and get in to measuring the vehicle. And I have the probe set up already on each point that it told me where to put it. And once it's all set up, that'll send sound waves, and it measures every 3 seconds. So if a vehicle is damaged and we do have to change the points and move it, we can measure that every 3 seconds and watch as we're pulling it and get it into specs in millimeters. This is how accurate we can be. We can go into what we call the live polling screen, which is, it shows what you're doing, and it'll give number specific. To the average guy, this may not mean much, but this is showing each point that I'm measuring, and it's given a length, width, and a height for each one, and I can be that accurate with it. When it's showing a 0, that means it's right where it should be. 1 is 1 millimeter. So it's very accurate, and you can get it right down to where it's within the specs, factory specs. What's also nice about this is you know that the frame's right, and you can get the vehicle aligned, sets it right back up to where it should be from the factory.
So as Brian showed and explained on the Shark, equipment like this, highly trained technicians were able to restore a vehicle back to factory specifications in pre-loss condition. As he explained, the computer will measure in dictated points from point A to point B all the way on the vehicle. Being able to measure and monitor all those points at once ensures us to be able to restore a vehicle back to within factory specifications. So not only after the accident are we measuring your frame, then we can send it to our service department to have all the suspension gone through the same procedures and do an alignment on your suspension, therefore providing you back with a safe, drivable vehicle.